Chapter 3 is all about emotional communication, the ways that we manage and express emotions in the workplace. You may have heard that work is no place for emotion, that expressing emotions at work makes us unprofessional. But in reality, work is very emotional. We have lots of emotional reactions to the tasks that we perform. And in some cases, as in the opening case study, which features the work of a young man named Sanji, we can see that doing emotion is a central job skill. We see that Sanji, in his work as a telemarketer, has to elicit emotions in other people. He also has to absorb the emotions that he receives from unhappy customers. But it goes beyond that. We see that his emotional connections with his coworkers is really important to him. It makes the job worthwhile. And we can see that emotional communication is a form of abuse in this case, as his supervisor uses it to belittle and intimidate Sanji and even punish him. A lot of us, it turns out, perform at work what we call emotional labor. Emotional communication is absolutely central to work in our age. What is it? Well, it's the process of recognizing feelings, emotional reactions that you have to work. It's expressing your emotions, and sometimes we do that constructively and sometimes destructively. It's regulating our emotions, controlling them. It's eliciting emotion in other people, and sometimes it even involves fabricating emotions, sometimes individually or in conjunction with others, like when we whoop up enthusiasm at a sales rally. We have to be able to recognize that other people are engaging in communication that may be designed to create an emotional response in us. It may be designed, for instance, to intimidate us or to make us feel guilty. If we're emotionally aware enough to recognize things, we can make appropriate kinds of responses. So, why is this important? Well, as in the case of Sanji, emotional communication or emotional labor is a central requirement of career success for many of us. Anybody who does a service job, for instance, in sales, working with customers, working with clients, if you work at a restaurant, if you work with the public in public relations or any number of government positions, you, day in and day out, are performing emotional labor. It's a it's a job skill. Second, our relationships at work are highly dependent on the emotional experiences we share with others. If we're constantly expressing frustration or disappointment, that can create a kind of depressed workplace climate. On the other hand, if we're finding ways to laugh, share joy, create pride in the work that we're doing together on our team, that can be a powerful incentive. So, emotion is not just something that happens to us at work, it's embedded in the work and it's sometimes a requirement of the work. It can also affect our health. People who engage in jobs that are emotionally demanding, like police officers or nurses or classroom teachers, day in and day out, they're absorbing and controlling emotion. That can be exhausting and it can take a toll on our health and our life satisfaction. So, people who do intensive emotional labor often need more support to continue with that work, or they end up leaving those jobs after even just a few years. And finally, some emotions are just really important cues to what's going on in our workplace. For instance, if you feel guilt or shame, that probably means that you're being asked to do something at work that contradicts some really important values. And you will need to think about whether you actually want to continue to do that work, to speak up about it, to try to make a change so that you can work in a way that feels good emotionally and ethically. And before I leave this topic of why emotions are so important at work, I just want to note that we often talk about negative emotions at work, the anger we feel or the disappointment, the boss who's out of control. But positive emotion is a crucial part of life. And part of our skill set needs to be recognizing those times when we just haven't had enough positive emotions, finding ways to create joy for ourselves, satisfaction, pride, excitement at work. So positive emotion is an important part of the puzzle. As we think about the key studies that are discussed in this chapter, there's some really interesting work, and some of it's been around for a long time. A researcher named Hochschild started a lot of us thinking about these issues when she studied airline attendants. And you can imagine that that's a job that requires a lot of emotional control. Airline attendants receive a lot of abuse. They have to remain calm. They have to remain pleasant. If it's a situation where the passengers are afraid, maybe because of some turbulence, it's the airline attendants that have to try to project a sense of calm to manage those fears. So this is an example of a job that requires intense emotional labor. Hochschild documented the kinds of labor, making distinctions between, for instance, surface acting, where you're sort of pretending to feel an emotion, like you're pretending that you're happy to be on the job, versus deep acting, which is where you actually teach yourself to feel the emotions that you need to feel at work. So you're not only supposed to feel enthusiastic, but you actually genuinely convince yourself that you are enthusiastic about your job. When you can do deep acting, it's almost like you're not acting anymore. You actually are feeling what you're supposed to feel. The question for Hochschild is there some cost when we convince ourselves to feel these feelings that we might otherwise not? And she did suggest that there are some costs in terms of burnout, in terms of feeling kind of numb to the real emotional situations that we face outside of work. We hear from a number of authors, I'm one of them, Waldron, but others who studied the role of emotion in relationships. And what you can see through that whole section of the chapter is that our decisions about when and how to express emotion can be risky, but they are also the way that we build strong bonds with other people. When we encourage people to express their frustrations to us, when we're able to listen to emotions that feel uncomfortable, maybe emotions that we don't even expect to see at work when people are upset enough to cry or to express fear. That can result in some powerful bonds if we're able to do that in a supportive way. On the other hand, if we engage in a lot of venting without any purpose, or if we're a powerful person, and powerful people do often have the opportunity to express their anger, and we do that a lot, we can be sure that people will learn to avoid us because none of us want to be the object of venting day in and day out. Another aspect, and this is a less pleasant dimension of emotional communication, is what I've come to call emotional tyranny. This is when people with power abuse the people they work with through emotional communication. They can do it by intimidating, belittling, pretending like the real emotions that people are experiencing aren't real or legitimate. They can do it by expressing rage in ways that are only destructive. In your chapter, you see there's a whole long list of what I've come to call the tactics of emotional tyrants. Take a look at that list and think about yourself. If you're using some of those tactics, you might think about the cost to yourself and others. Of course, all of us probably engage with some of these behaviors at some time. But these are the kinds of behaviors that people report experiencing when they're unhappy at work, when they feel like they're being abused, where they're on the cusp of leaving the job. It's because of this kind of emotional tyranny. And that's what we need to be aware of. Well, as you think about applying our model to this particular kind of communication, think about the attending phase. And think about the cues that you could look for to know that you're experiencing emotion. Like, what is it you're feeling inside? Are these feelings that you could put into words, if not at work, with other people? so you can get those emotions out and move to the next phase, which is making sense of them. Why are you feeling afraid? What is it that's making you frustrated day in and day out at work? What is that guilt that you're feeling, and what could it mean? Which values of yours are being violated at work? That might be the sense making where you're raising questions and sharing them with others. We all have to make the decision about whether or not to express emotion and then the best way to do that. We talk about the case of Felipe, who did decide to speak up. Speaking up and sharing emotions can be a risky thing to do. But often, if we take responsibility for our emotions and give voice to them, we might be surprised at how other people respond in constructive ways. And we might be surprised to find that other people are also feeling a little bit afraid, a little bit frustrated, a little bit guilty about what's going on. And finally, that last phase of maintenance. How do we make it normal for people to talk about emotions at work in constructive ways? Can we look for the behaviors that we're using ourselves that are discouraging other people from sharing their emotions? For instance, are we belittling people when they get emotional or calling them emotionally needy, right? Um, are there ways that we can encourage people to share experiences where they've been emotional and maybe work through those emotions? A time when they were really angry at a customer or afraid of what was happening. What did they do? What worked? How did they get beyond the emotion? Talking about emotion in these ways as a regular part of work is a way to maintain a lower level of risk.